In the vast reaches of space, beyond the edge of known galactic maps, an ancient and powerful alien empire ruled over hundreds of worlds. The Zarek, a species of conquerors, were feared by every race that had ever crossed their path. With their advanced technology and relentless thirst for dominance, they had crushed civilizations and enslaved entire planets without mercy. The Zarek had never known defeat, and they had no reason to believe that their reign could ever be challenged. But that was before they encountered humanity. On a desolate, forgotten world deep in the outskirts of Zarek-controlled space, a small human colony had established itself. For years, the humans lived in isolation, cut off from the broader galaxy, working the land, building their homes, and growing their families. They weren't fighters. They weren't soldiers. They weren't even aware of the Zarek Empire's vast reach. That is, until the Zarek discovered them. The first Zarek scout ship arrived at the human colony with little warning. With their advanced sensors and weapons, the Zarek were accustomed to spotting potential threats before they ever had a chance to retaliate. They landed in a quiet, unassuming valley where the humans had settled, hoping to wipe out what they considered an insignificant, primitive race. They had underestimated one thing, however, the indomitable spirit of humanity. The Zarek's landing was swift. The humans were caught off guard, their only defenses being rudimentary guns and makeshift barricades. The alien soldiers marched through the colony, razing homes, and slaughtering those who dared to resist. But in the face of death, something stirred within the human heart, something ancient, something powerful. As the first wave of Zarek soldiers advanced, the humans fought back with a ferocity that no one could have predicted. The men and women of the colony were not military trained, nor were they in any way prepared for the advanced weaponry the Zarek brought with them. But the humans had something more potent, their will to survive. They fought with a raw, primal rage, using every tool at their disposal, from farming implements to makeshift explosives. The battle was brutal and desperate, but the humans had a secret weapon the Zarek could never have anticipated, a unity forged through shared struggle, a bond that no alien race could comprehend. The humans fought not just for their lives, but for their future, for their families, and for the generations yet to come. They fought not out of training or knowledge, but because they had no other choice. In the chaos, a small group of humans managed to capture a Zarek soldier. Bound and gagged, the alien warrior was dragged back to the makeshift command center, where the human leaders began to interrogate him. The soldier, stunned by the sheer audacity of being captured, was shaken by the determination in the eyes of his captors. His pride as a member of the mighty Zarek Empire had been crushed by a ragtag group of primitive humans. "We are the Zarek," the soldier spat, his voice laced with contempt. "You will bow before us, or you will be destroyed. There is no other way." The human leader, a middle-aged man named Captain Samuel Hayes, looked down at the soldier with cold eyes. "You've made a mistake. We're not here to bow. We're not here to surrender. We're here to fight, and we will make sure you never forget us." The soldier, still trying to hold on to his arrogance, sneered. "You think you can stop the Zarek? You think you can win against an empire that has conquered worlds for centuries? You're nothing but insects to us." Hayes' eyes narrowed. "That's where you're wrong. You may have conquered worlds, but you've never faced humanity. We may be small, we may be outgunned, but we fight for something you'll never understand. You'll regret ever stepping foot on this planet." With those words, the first of many battles began. The Zarek had underestimated the humans in every way. They believed that fear, technology, and sheer force would win the day. But what they had failed to account for was the one thing no other species had, the will to never back down, no matter the cost. The humans would not surrender. They would not fall. The fight for survival had just begun. And the Zarek would soon learn that the humans weren't there to die. They were there to make their presence known. And they were coming for the Empire's throat. After the humans' unexpected resistance on the ground, the Zarek were shaken. A group of primitive humans had managed to strike back, but the Zarek were not in the habit of showing mercy. They understood one thing well: when faced with defiance, the best way to handle it was to obliterate the source of that defiance. So they sent reinforcements, advanced warships, legions of battle-hardened soldiers, and their deadliest weapons. However, the humans weren't waiting around to be wiped out. In the days that followed the initial skirmishes, something remarkable happened. The small colony, once a peaceful, isolated outpost, transformed into a rallying point for other human settlements across the star system. News of the human resistance spread like wildfire, carried on comms networks and whispered across the galaxy by every ship that passed by. There was talk of a small human outpost standing against the seemingly unstoppable Zarek. Word of their resilience echoed across the stars. Captain Hayes, now a symbol of hope and rebellion, quickly became the focal point of the growing resistance. With the Zarek's overwhelming forces closing in, humanity's response was swift and clever. The humans might have been outmatched in technology, but they had something else: ingenuity. Within a week of the first battle, humans began to build weapons from scrap metal and technology scavenged from the wreckage of Zarek ships. Makeshift bombers were repurposed from civilian transports, and underground bunkers were reinforced with whatever materials could be found. The human engineers, many of them once just ordinary farmers and factory workers, quickly became experts at improvisation. Using Zarek technology as their blueprint, they developed countermeasures, hack-proof systems, and even rudimentary EMP weapons. Meanwhile, human guerrilla units began to form, operating in small cells that harried Zarek patrols, sabotaged supply lines, and tore apart communication networks. Each small victory fed the growing fire of rebellion, each success bringing new volunteers eager to join the fight. The Zarek, for all their power, were struggling to adapt. They underestimated the tenacity of the humans. Their military tactics, honed through centuries of conquest, proved ineffective against an enemy that didn't fight conventionally. The humans didn't have the numbers, the ships, or the technology to match the Zarek in a straight-up fight. But they didn't need to. On the ground, the humans fought not with machines, but with their own fierce will. In the forests, they set traps that took down Zarek soldiers one by one. In the cities, they set ambushes, slipping past the enemy lines and striking with precision before vanishing into the shadows. Humanity's greatest strength was their adaptability, and it was now on full display. But the Zarek were not blind to the growing threat. They understood now that this wasn't just an isolated rebellion, it was the beginning of something far larger. The humans' resistance had to be crushed before it spread any further. In response, the Zarek launched a full-scale invasion, sending their most advanced warships to bombard the planet from orbit. The skies grew dark with the shadows of Zarek dreadnoughts, their guns trained on the human colony below. The humans had no hope of matching the might of the Zarek fleets, but Hayes had a plan, an unconventional one. The humans had one advantage: the Zarek were predictable. They operated with a heavy reliance on their technology, using centralized command networks and rigid military hierarchies. If the humans could somehow disrupt their systems, they might just have a chance to turn the tide. As the Zarek forces moved closer, Hayes and his team launched a daring raid on one of the Zarek's primary communication hubs. It was a high-risk operation, but if they could disable the hub, they might just cripple the enemy's coordination. The mission would take everything the humans had left. In the depths of a crumbling city, Hayes and his team infiltrated the Zarek base under the cover of night. Every step was a gamble, every moment they spent in enemy territory brought them closer to death. But their will was strong, and their resolve was unyielding. After hours of tense maneuvering, they breached the main hub. The Zarek soldiers, unaware of the humans' presence, continued their operations. But just as Hayes and his team set the charges, a familiar voice crackled over their comms. "Captain Hayes, we've got incoming." The ground shook as the Zarek's ships fired at the planet below. The countdown was ticking, but the humans had one more chance to stop them. "Do it," Hayes ordered. In a burst of explosive energy, the communication hub erupted in flames, and with it, the Zarek's coordination system was shattered. For the first time, the mighty empire of the Zarek had lost its grip on the battlefield. In the chaos that followed, the humans rallied, pushing back with every ounce of their strength. And the Zarek realized that this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for dominance. The fire had spread, and there was no turning back. With the Zarek's communication system crippled, chaos began to reign in their ranks. Military units, no longer able to coordinate effectively, fell into disarray. Some began retreating, others attacking one another in confusion. The humans, who had once been scattered and struggling for survival, now saw an opportunity to press the attack. Captain Hayes and the growing resistance seized on the disarray, organizing counter-offensive strikes across the planet. Small, highly mobile human units began targeting key military installations, taking down Zarek outposts and disrupting their supply chains. Every skirmish became a victory, every success building momentum for a larger revolt. For the first time since the Zarek arrived, it seemed that the humans could stand their ground. But the Zarek were not a race to be underestimated. Even as their forces faltered, they regrouped swiftly. The Zarek High Command, furious at their losses, sent in their most formidable commanders, military tacticians known for their ruthlessness. The humans, having scored a few significant victories, were no longer a small, insignificant colony. They had become a threat, and the Zarek would not allow such defiance to go unpunished. As the Zarek prepared their counterattack, a strange thing happened among the humans. Across the galaxy, whispers of the rebellion reached the ears of other human colonies. Some had been aware of the Zarek presence in the region, but many were oblivious. What had begun as a localized resistance had now sparked a fire across humanity's scattered outposts. Ships filled with reinforcements began to trickle in from nearby human colonies, bringing with them supplies, troops, and technology. The first wave of reinforcements arrived in a fleet of old cargo ships retrofitted with basic weaponry and makeshift armor. They weren't impressive by Zarek standards, but they were enough to bolster the beleaguered human forces. Among the ships that arrived was a legendary figure, someone who had not been seen in years, Admiral Rachel Voss. Once a commander of a fleet tasked with exploring the farthest reaches of the galaxy, Voss was now considered one of the most decorated and capable military minds among humanity. When the word of the Zarek invasion spread, she immediately gathered a fleet of survivors from various human outposts, determined to aid in the defense of her people. Voss understood what many did not, that the Zarek might have underestimated the resolve of humanity, but they had yet to fully understand the tactical genius and resourcefulness that humans possessed. Captain Hayes and Admiral Voss quickly formed an alliance, combining their forces into a new, unified resistance. While Hayes handled the ground operations, leading guerrilla warfare and smaller-scale engagements, Voss focused on organizing the fleet's strategy. Together, they were a formidable pair, one grounded in the chaos of close combat, the other a master of naval warfare. The Zarek, unaware of the full scale of the human rebellion, continued their assault, sending their fleets to pound the surface of the planet into submission. Massive orbital bombardments tore apart entire cities, leveling human strongholds with deadly precision. But as the Zarek warships descended from orbit, they were met with a surprise. The human fleet, though small, was far more organized and aggressive than the Zarek had anticipated. Voss had carefully studied the Zarek's weaknesses, and she knew that the Empire's ships were heavily reliant on centralized control systems. As the battle began in the void of space, the human fleet hit them with unexpected precision, ambushing Zarek warships and forcing them into defensive formations they weren't prepared for. In the chaos of the space battle, the humans employed tactics that the Zarek had never encountered. Instead of large, coordinated attacks, the humans relied on hit-and-run tactics, using their smaller ships to strike at Zarek vessels, retreating quickly before the enemy could retaliate. This tactic, which the Zarek considered primitive, was the very thing that gave the humans an advantage. The Zarek warships, with their immense firepower and imposing size, were slow to react to the guerrilla-style warfare humans were waging in the stars. On the ground, the humans continued to fight with relentless passion. They knew the stakes now. It was no longer just about defending a colony, it was about proving that the Zarek were not invincible. It was about sending a message to the galaxy that humanity would not be conquered. Every victory, no matter how small, sent ripples across the stars. The human rebellion was spreading, and the Zarek were feeling the pressure. The Zarek High Command, in desperation, ordered their fleets to tighten their grip on the planet, intending to crush the human resistance once and for all. They sent their most fearsome warships, massive dreadnoughts equipped with planet-killer weapons, into orbit, their guns trained on the surface below. But just as the Zarek were ready to fire, a new wave of human ships arrived, launching a final strike to push back the Zarek warships. The battle for the planet reached its peak as the Zarek, now forced to fight on two fronts, both in space and on the surface, were beginning to feel the weight of their miscalculation. Humanity had come together, and the Zarek would soon discover that they had made a critical mistake. They had thought the humans were weak, that they would surrender. Instead, they had created a storm. And this storm, once unleashed, would not be stopped. The Zarek were in retreat. At least, that was what it seemed like. On the ground, human resistance cells, with their guerrilla tactics and relentless determination, had gained ground in several key regions. The Zarek warships, despite their overwhelming firepower, had been forced into disarray by the unorthodox maneuvers of the human fleet. The once invincible empire was now facing the unthinkable, a genuine fight for survival. But the Zarek were not a race to give up easily. Their leaders, furious at the repeated setbacks, were preparing for their final, decisive move. The humans had made them bleed, but the Zarek knew they had one card left to play, one weapon that could wipe out the resistance in a single stroke. A massive Zarek warship, the Vengeance, one of their greatest dreadnoughts, was heading towards the human stronghold, a floating fortress capable of unleashing devastating weapons from orbit. On board the Vengeance, the Zarek Supreme Commander, an imposing figure named Korthor, paced back and forth. His mind was locked in a single thought: end this. Destroy them all. The Zarek had no intention of allowing humanity to spread its rebellion beyond this planet. They had underestimated the humans' ingenuity and willpower, and now they would crush them completely. With the Vengeance, they would reduce the planet to rubble, ensuring no trace of the human resistance remained. While the Zarek made their preparations, the human forces were not idle. Under the leadership of Captain Hayes and Admiral Voss, humanity had begun to prepare for the final confrontation. They knew they could not face the Vengeance head-on and win. The Zarek dreadnought was too powerful. But they also knew that the Zarek had a critical vulnerability: overconfidence. Through careful espionage and intelligence gathering, the humans had uncovered a significant weakness in the Zarek's warship systems. The Vengeance relied heavily on a centralized energy core, a power source that not only provided energy for its weapons but also for its shield systems. If they could target and disable this core, they could cripple the dreadnought's capabilities and turn the tide of the battle. To do this, the humans needed to infiltrate the Vengeance itself. They had one chance. If they failed, it would mean the end of everything. Admiral Voss knew the risks. She gathered a team of the best engineers, infiltrators, and fighters, people from all walks of life who had risen to the occasion when called upon. Together, they would embark on a mission no one thought possible: to board the Vengeance and plant a device capable of destroying its power core from the inside. The plan was set in motion. Meanwhile, on the surface, Captain Hayes led his forces in a series of desperate defensive maneuvers. As the Vengeance descended from orbit, the human resistance intensified its efforts to slow its advance. They set up defenses around major cities, using everything from tanks to scavenged Zarek tech to create fortifications. They knew that the battle for their planet would soon reach its most intense moment. Every inch of land, every human life, depended on the outcome of what was to come. The Zarek's massive ships loomed ominously above, casting long shadows over the surface below. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, humanity held firm, fighting with everything they had left. The streets were filled with the sounds of gunfire, the hum of makeshift machines, and the roar of engines. The final battle had begun, and the humans were determined to make it their victory. But the real test would come in space, when Admiral Voss's team boarded the Vengeance and attempted to carry out their mission. In the dark expanse of space, the human boarding team, in a fleet of commandeered Zarek ships, approached the dreadnought under the cover of the planet's atmosphere. They flew low, staying out of the Zarek's radar range, and maneuvered their way to the Vengeance's docking bays. the stealthy approach worked, the team was able to board the ship undetected. Now inside the massive Zarek vessel, the team faced an even greater challenge. The Zarek didn't just trust their technology to keep enemies out, they had stationed elite guards at every key juncture. The human team had no choice but to fight their way through the halls of the enemy ship, slipping past heavily armed patrols and using every bit of their training and experience to stay one step ahead. The further they penetrated, the more desperate their situation became. They were running out of time. Soon, the Zarek would notice their intrusion, and when they did, they would stop at nothing to destroy them. Every hallway they crossed, every room they cleared, brought them closer to the power core, but the closer they got, the more they realized how deeply the Zarek had entrenched themselves in the heart of their warship. Back on the planet, the ground battle raged. Hayes fought with his usual relentless strategy, drawing the Zarek into a series of traps that delayed their progress. Human forces fought fiercely in the streets, knowing that their survival depended on keeping the Zarek occupied just long enough for the sabotage mission to succeed. In the heart of the vengeance, the human team reached the power core, only to find a heavily guarded control room. A wave of Zarek soldiers charged at them, weapons raised. They had no choice but to fight back. If they failed here, the entire rebellion would be for nothing. It was a fierce, brutal battle. With every second that passed, the weight of the moment hung heavier. One misstep, one failed maneuver, and the mission would end in disaster. But the humans had come this far, and they would not falter now. Admiral Voss's strategy had led them to this moment, and now, with a final, desperate effort, the human team planted the explosive charges on the core. As the Zarek closed in on them, the countdown began. The fate of the entire rebellion rested in their hands. The countdown echoed through the vengeance, a constant reminder of the risk the humans had taken. Inside the massive warship, Admiral Voss's infiltration team was locked in a desperate battle with the Zarek soldiers. Their explosive charges, planted deep in the heart of the ship, were their only hope, but only if they could make it out alive. The Zarek, realizing the breach, began flooding the corridors, their heavy footsteps reverberating as they closed in. The team's leader, Captain Sarah Hawk, motioned for the others to fall back. "We can't let them stop us now. We're almost there," she shouted, her voice grim but determined. As the team scrambled toward the exit, the blaring sound of alarms filled the corridors. The Zarek were mobilizing quickly. Every step they took was met with a hail of fire, the Zarek showing no mercy as they pushed forward relentlessly. Hawk's heart raced, but she kept her focus. The explosive charges were set to trigger in less than 5 minutes, and they had to make it back to the ship's external docking bay to escape. Their only chance was to make it through the hellish maze of corridors back to their extraction point. If they failed, the vengeance would remain intact, and with it, the full might of the Zarek fleet. Earth, the rebellion, and every other human colony would be lost. Meanwhile, outside the vengeance, the human fleet, though small compared to the Zarek's massive dreadnoughts, had rallied under Admiral Voss's strategic brilliance. The Zarek's forces were still overwhelming in number, but now the humans were fighting with desperation and purpose. The human ships, agile and relentless, attacked from all sides, distracting and outmaneuvering their much larger foes. The Zarek tried to retaliate, but their ships, still crippled from previous engagements, struggled to respond in kind. On the surface, Captain Hayes and his ground forces faced an unrelenting onslaught. With the vengeance in orbit, the Zarek had launched a final ground invasion, sending wave after wave of soldiers to crush the remaining resistance. The once promising human strongholds were beginning to crumble, their barricades no longer holding against the sheer weight of the Zarek assault. Still, the humans fought fiercely, each soldier knowing their sacrifice was buying time for something far greater. In the skies above, a massive explosion lit up the horizon. It was the human fleet, coordinating their assault on the Zarek flagship with deadly precision. The humans had launched a new wave of attacks, this time focusing all their firepower on the vengeance. The dreadnought, already damaged and unable to maintain its usual high-tech shields, was slowly beginning to falter under the weight of concentrated fire. The Zarek, however, would not go down without a fight. In their desperation, they unleashed their ultimate weapon, an experimental energy cannon capable of devastating planetary surface targets. It was their last-ditch effort to break the human resistance once and for all. If the humans couldn't take down the Vengeance before the cannon fired, the planet would be lost. Back inside the Vengeance, Hawk and her team were nearly there, the extraction point only a few hundred meters away. They could hear the heavy footsteps of Zarek soldiers closing in behind them, and the constant blaring of alarms had reached a fever pitch. It seemed as though everything was falling apart. Yet the explosive charges, now set and ready to detonate, were their only hope. The fate of humanity rested on their success. With a few final bursts of gunfire, they made it to the external docking bay. The escape ships waited in the shadows, engines powered and ready for the desperate journey back to the human fleet. As Hawk and the rest of the team scrambled aboard the nearest vessel, the last of the Zarek soldiers reached them, firing into the air. "We're out of time," Hawk shouted to the pilot. The explosion was imminent, and if they didn't leave now, they would never make it. The pilot didn't need another word. He gunned the engines, and the escape ship rocketed away from the Vengeance, narrowly evading a barrage of enemy fire. The countdown clock was at 0. In the final seconds, the Vengeance, the symbol of Zarek dominance, shuddered as the charges detonated. The explosion was massive, a blinding burst of energy that rippled through the heart of the ship. The Vengeance's massive hull cracked apart, its engines erupting in a wave of flame. The resulting shockwave rocked the nearby Zarek fleet, throwing their ships into disarray. The explosion was so powerful it could be seen from the surface of the planet. A brilliant, fiery burst filled the sky, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The Zarek fleet, now without its central command and flagship, was thrown into chaos. Human ships, despite their small size, seized the opportunity and launched a series of coordinated attacks on the now disoriented enemy fleet. On the ground, Captain Hayes watched as the sky above shifted from chaos to quiet. The massive explosion had sent shockwaves through the atmosphere, but the Zarek were finally reeling. Their once impenetrable fleet was in disarray, their command structure shattered. The humans had done it. The battle was far from over, but the tide had shifted. The Vengeance was gone. And with it, the greatest threat humanity had ever faced. Hayes looked toward the horizon, where the remnants of the Zarek bombardment still lingered in the air. The humans had won a battle, but the war was still far from over. They had no illusions of an easy victory. The Zarek would return, but next time, humanity would be ready. And for the first time, humanity could taste something sweet. The Zarek Empire was not invincible. The humans would fight, they would rise, and they would take their place among the stars. The destruction of the Vengeance had shaken the Zarek Empire to its core. In one brilliant, coordinated strike, humanity had dealt a crippling blow to the heart of the Zarek war machine. But while the humans celebrated their hard-fought victory, the larger war was far from over. The Zarek High Command was not one to suffer failure lightly, and they would not allow the loss of their flagship to be the end of their domination. Back on Earth, the human leadership was reeling from the implications of their victory. In the aftermath of the Vengeance's destruction, a new era of uncertainty began. The Zarek would undoubtedly retaliate, and humanity's fragile alliance of colonies had to consolidate quickly before the invaders could regroup. The human fleet, bolstered by the successful sabotage of the Zarek flagship, was already preparing for the next stage of the war. Admiral Rachel Voss stood in the operations command room aboard the human flagship Resolute, surveying the holographic map of the galaxy. The stars were dotted with pockets of human resistance and slowly growing bastions of civilization. But the Zarek Empire, even without their flagship, was vast. And their next move was anyone's guess. "Admiral, the Zarek are massing forces," a fleet officer reported, his voice grim. "They've regrouped their fleets, and we're picking up signs of a retaliatory strike. It seems they intend to come at us in full force." Voss clenched her jaw, her mind racing. The battle at Earth had given humanity a glimmer of hope, but it was clear that the Zarek had not been broken, only delayed. A new offensive was coming, and it would test humanity's resolve in ways they had never imagined. Prepare the fleet for a defensive formation, she said firmly. We need to hit them before they hit us. This time, we can't wait for them to make the first move. But it wasn't just the fleet that Voss was concerned about. The Zarek had learned from their losses, and their next strategy was likely to be more tactical. They would no longer underestimate humanity's will to fight, but neither would they be caught off guard again. The humans needed to adapt, and they needed to do so quickly. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, Captain Hayes had returned to the front lines. The ground war was just as fierce as the battle in space, if not more so. The Zarek, despite their defeat in the sky, had begun their relentless assault once more, this time utilizing new tactics and technologies designed to neutralize human guerrilla forces. The Zarek had begun deploying heavily armored ground mechs, towering machines of war capable of stomping through cities and leveling entire districts with ease. We're not dealing with the same enemy anymore, Hayes muttered to his officers as they prepared for the next wave. They've adapted. We need to find a way to hit them where it hurts. Humanity's resistance was proving difficult to suppress, but the Zarek had begun deploying their newest weapon, something that was unlike anything the humans had faced before. These mechs, though slow, were equipped with devastating plasma weapons and enormous shields, making them nearly impervious to conventional human attacks. What had once been a war of maneuverability and surprise tactics had now evolved into a fight of attrition, with the humans struggling to match the Zarek's technological advantage. Despite these setbacks, the spirit of the human resistance remained unbroken. The human soldiers, some veterans of the initial skirmishes, others newly trained recruits, rallied behind Hayes. We fight as one, he reminded them. Every inch we hold is another nail in the coffin of their empire. In the midst of these battles, a new strategy was forming in the minds of the human leaders. The victory at the Vengeance had proven that humanity could strike decisively, but they couldn't do it alone. The call for reinforcements was sent out to the farthest reaches of human space, colonies, outposts, and even independent factions who had once been considered allies in name only. The human race had to unite, not just for survival but for the very future of their species. It was a call for all to arms, a plea to stand together in the face of a galaxy-wide threat. Throughout the galaxy, messages were broadcast: the humans are coming. And we are not here to surrender. The words, simple yet powerful, reverberated through the void of space. They were more than just a message, they were a rallying cry, one that would echo across human colonies, from the core worlds to the frontier. On distant colonies, people who had never met a Zarek face-to-face were suddenly aware of the threat. Systems once considered safe were now in danger, and the call to arms was not one that could be ignored. The response from the human colonies was overwhelming. Ships were retrofitted, weapons were scavenged, and soldiers were trained. As the human resistance began to unite, new alliances were formed, and a vast human fleet was slowly assembled. The Zarek, however, were not idle. Their fleets, though fragmented, were still formidable. And as the Zarek High Command regrouped, they turned their attention toward Earth. If they could crush humanity's homeworld once and for all, they could break the spirit of the resistance. It would be a blow too deep to recover from, a final strike to send a message to the galaxy that no one defied the Zarek Empire and survived. But the humans had something the Zarek did not: they had hope. Hope, born from their victories, their unity, and their defiance. Hope that no matter how fierce the coming battles would be, they would not be broken. As Admiral Voss rallied the human fleet, preparing for the largest space battle humanity had ever seen, Captain Hayes led his forces in the trenches. Together, they would face the Zarek's final assault. Together, they would prove that the fight for Earth was not over. Humanity was ready for the next chapter. And this time, they would strike first. The calm before the storm had settled. Across the human colonies, from the battered streets of Earth to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, the call to arms had been answered. Ships assembled in orbit, fleets forming a defense network unlike anything seen before. The human resistance was no longer scattered and fractured. It was united. Every human, every colony, every independent force now fought with the same purpose. The Zarek Empire had underestimated them once, and they wouldn't make that mistake again. Admiral Rachel Voss stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring out at the formation of human ships that spanned the stars. Around her, officers moved with precision, preparing for what would be the most significant battle of humanity's existence. The Zarek were coming in full force, their massive dreadnoughts and armies massing near Earth's orbit. The war, which had once seemed impossible to win, had reached its final chapter. "We've got one chance," Voss said, turning to her staff. "We hold them here, and we take the fight to them. We're not just defending Earth, we're fighting for the future of every human colony. If we fail, this will be the end of us. But if we succeed, the Zarek Empire will crumble, and humanity will take its place in the stars." Captain Hayes, meanwhile, stood on Earth's surface, overseeing the final preparations for the ground defense. His forces, tired but resolute, had fortified every position, every city. The Zarek's brutal tactics had proven effective in the past, but humanity had learned from every engagement, adapting quickly to the overwhelming power of their enemies. The Zarek had their mechs, their plasma weapons, and their advanced technologies, but humanity had something even more formidable: the will to survive. "They're coming," Hayes muttered, watching the sky. A fleet of Zarek warships descended from orbit, each ship a harbinger of destruction. It was an intimidating sight, far greater than any force humanity had faced before. But as the first Zarek soldiers set foot on Earth's soil, they would soon learn that their opponents were not so easily crushed. The first wave of Zarek mechs hit the Earth's surface with terrifying force. Their massive metal legs pounded the ground, sending tremors through the earth. Cities were razed, buildings crumbling under the sheer might of their assault. Yet, humanity's defenses were prepared. Resistance cells, hidden deep in the shadows, emerged from their concealment, using guerrilla tactics to harass and slow the invaders. It wasn't enough to stop the onslaught, but it was enough to make the Zarek think twice before advancing too quickly. Hayes's voice rang through the comms. "Hold the line, no matter what. Every second we delay them is a victory." In space, the battle was just as fierce. The Zarek fleet, massive and terrifying, closed in on the human defenses around Earth. Their dreadnoughts, capable of devastating entire planets, lined up in formation, each ship bristling with weapons. They fired massive plasma beams at the human fleet, but humanity's ships, smaller and more agile, dodged and weaved through the massive explosions, striking back with everything they had. Admiral Voss's voice echoed through the comms, calm but determined. "Target their engines. If we take out their power, we can disable their weapons." The humans fought back with all the firepower they had. Every ship, every crew member, knew that this was it. There would be no retreat, no second chances. The battle would be won or lost in the next few hours. But even as they fought with all their might, the Zarek unleashed their final weapon, a massive, planetary-scale energy cannon, designed to obliterate Earth itself. It charged slowly, but the humans could feel the danger with every passing second. "Prepare to fire," a Zarek officer shouted from aboard their flagship. In that moment, Voss saw it, the opportunity they had been waiting for. "Target the energy cannon," she ordered, her voice steady. "Everything we have on that weapon. Now!" The human fleet concentrated their fire on the Zarek dreadnought's cannon. The battle was a blur of flashing lights, explosions, and the shrill sound of metal on metal. The Zarek ship began to break apart under the pressure of the combined firepower of humanity's ships. But the cannon was still operational. Desperation set in. "We need to do more," Voss cried. "Take it down, or Earth's gone." In that instant, Captain Hayes had an idea. They had infiltrated Zarek ships before, but this time, the humans would fight fire with fire. A small strike team, led by a special operations commander, was sent to board the Zarek flagship directly. The goal: sabotage the cannon before it could fire. The boarding team, under the cover of the human fleet's fire, breached the Zarek flagship. They fought their way through the ship, encountering fierce resistance from Zarek forces. Every inch they gained was hard-won, their weapons cutting through alien metal and flesh alike. Finally, they reached the heart of the weapon, an enormous core, glowing with energy. "This is it," the commander said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Plant the charges. We can't let this fire." As they set the explosives, Zarek soldiers stormed the chamber, but the humans fought them off with brutal efficiency. The charges were planted. The countdown began. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Hayes and his forces fought to the bitter end. His troops were exhausted, many injured, but they fought on, refusing to give in. Humanity had already endured so much, it would not fall now. "Hold the line!" Hayes shouted as Zarek forces surged forward, their mechs crashing through barricades. The final minutes were upon them. With a massive, deafening explosion, the Zarek cannon detonated, its energy core ripping apart the flagship in a chain reaction. The massive dreadnought shuddered, and the entire Zarek fleet was thrown into disarray. The cannon's energy was dissipated in a wave of fire, cascading through the Zarek formation like a supernova. As the Zarek fleet faltered, humanity pushed forward, taking advantage of the confusion. With coordinated strikes, the human fleet crippled the remaining Zarek ships, and on the ground, the remaining Zarek forces were pushed back. The war was not over, there would still be battles to fight, and sacrifices to be made, but humanity had won. They had driven the Zarek from Earth, crippled their fleet, and proved once and for all that they would never surrender. And so, amidst the wreckage and the smoke, Admiral Voss and Captain Hayes stood together, looking out at the sky. Humanity had risen, and now, for the first time in centuries, they knew their place in the stars. The Zarek Empire was broken. And the humans had claimed their victory. It was just the beginning of a new chapter.